Well, welcome to week 3 of Titus. I hope you found the first other weeks really helpful, and whether you've done the week 1 or both week 1 and week 2. And this week we get into the nitty gritty of Titus, study 3 verses 1 to 4 of chapter 1, which is the intro where we get to meet Paul and Titus. At first glance you might be thinking, now this is a pretty small passage for quite a long study, but there's stacks of detail and there's stacks of really good juicy chunks in each part, and it actually takes quite a bit of work to get the flow going in your head so that you can see, okay, I get where Paul's coming from here, I understand how his argument works. So it's worth putting in the time, and we're going to be doing that by just slowing down, breaking it up into pieces and dividing the passage into understandable bits and then putting it back together so it makes sense for you and for the group. So it's a good thing to maybe give this a bit of a run first yourself, divvy it up and then see exactly what's his train of thought, what's his logic. Get your commentaries as well, have a look at those. That will help you if you're struggling to follow the flow there through chapter 1 to 4. It's probably the most complex part of understanding in the book, I guess. So Paul here, as he does with every letter that he writes, he chooses his words well. What he says there and what he says in other areas, it's great to compare them in other letters. So this time he refers to God and instead of Jesus in some areas, and then he compares the two in the way they both are involved in salvation. So you'll notice that as we look through together, but we're going to get into that in a minute. So as we think through the introduction, that leads us to understand why he's written the letter, what the situation in Crete is like, what's important to Paul, what should be important to Titus, and what he should be teaching. So have a look at chapter 1 to 5 there, have a read through that, and that's where we kick off. Then we'll break it into each part, as I was saying. So you want to work out each stage, what is Paul actually talking about? What's important to him, and why do you think he's chosen these words over other words, or not doing an intro at all? And we have a sheet there for you, and you can cut that into pieces. I reckon that's probably a really good way to do it. Just print it out, cut it into pieces, and give 1 or 2 points for each person, and say, why don't you spend 5-10 minutes looking up and thinking into what do these verses, what do these phrases mean, do you think? And so start off with, what are your own ideas about that? So, a servant of God, when Paul calls himself that, he says, an apostle of Jesus Christ for the faith of God's elect and for the knowledge of the truth that leads to godliness. So we break those into different pieces, and then you can cut them up and just give them to guys and say, why don't you spend 5 minutes thinking through, what does a servant of God mean, or a slave of God, which is the original Greek? And why would Paul say that? And what's he a slave of? He's a slave of God, but for what purpose? What's he trying to do there? And we'll be thinking into each of those key chunks. So we've got a whole bunch there. And then after people have spent maybe 4 or 5 minutes thinking through their own what they think it actually means, each section, then get them to look up the cross-references. So get them to do the work first, then get them to look up the cross-references, which will fill out more about what the passage is about and what each phrase is about. And then after that, get each person to share. So it'll be really helpful, probably maybe even read through it all again as a whole. It's only 4 verses. And then just say, okay, let's look at each chunk. Servant of God. What were your thoughts on what that means? What did the other references show you? There's no other references there, but for the second one, apostle of Christ Jesus, you go to Acts and Corinthians. What did those passages say? How does that help us understand what Paul's saying about himself and what an apostle of Jesus Christ is? And for the faith of God's elect, what does that mean? What do you think it means? What did your cross-references say? Get a bigger and bigger picture each step of the way. So that will be really helpful for getting a whole picture. And then at the end, after everybody's done that will take quite a long time. You imagine 4 or 5 minutes on your own ideas, Same again for looking up the references, jotting down what you think they are, and then discussing those together. You're looking at 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes already, quite easily. So, if you've got 10 people in your group and they're all saying something for 2 minutes each, well, that's 20 minutes easy. So this will fill up the majority of the looking at the Bible passage and fill up the majority of what the time that we have together. But then at the end, it's really important, I think, to help the group pull the bits back together and come up with a summary. So showing Paul's train of thought. So you might even come up with that yourself or on the fly. So you might think, oh, actually, this is what I have deduced from what we're all saying and put it together. You might even like to write out a summary beforehand that you think, actually, I've done the work beforehand, I've thought it through, this will help me think through how to teach it, and then I'll be able to run that through with the group at the end, as long as everybody's parts contributed and the summary I've done is helpful for that. Or you could get everybody else to do it, and you might even